Okay. Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to have you here today. And while we kind of get started and welcome people into the room, if you want to just drop your name into the chat and say a little bit about your role so we can get to know who's in the space today, that would be great with your institution and maybe one thing that you're looking forward to in the forthcoming, can we say spring? I think so. So, this is our agenda. We have a full agenda, and we are so thrilled to have owner Beckener helping to facilitate this session. So we'll be talking through quickly our human rights education norms and expectations, and then jumping into why we're all here today to learn more around technology, the influence of AI, surveillance, privacy, and how those things connect to human rights. So, human rights education is a lifelong process of teaching and learning that helps individuals and groups and communities to develop the knowledge, skills, and values to fully exercise and protect their human rights and those of others. Secondly, it fulfills their responsibilities in the context of the internationally recognized human rights principles. And lastly, this idea of achieving justice and peace in the world, as we know, is needed. So we've worked through the World Program for Human Rights Education, and really human rights education centers on the three components of educating about human rights, educating through human rights, and educating for human rights and the empowerment of rights. So as we kind of facilitate our conversation tonight, we're going to focus on these kind of expectations to make sure that we're all taking a sense of responsibility for hopefully engaging as much as we are able to empathize and listen to others when they're sharing their inputs, sharing airtime, participating, bringing in, of course, enthusiasm late in the day after we've already had a full work, many times work day. So thanks for being here. And then communication, trying to improve our communication skills, which will hopefully center on our trust and learning together. So as I mentioned, we are thrilled to have Professor Onur Bacaner from Seattle University with us. He is a distinguished scholar in this field, and we are just thrilled. He brings with him much expertise. He might share a little bit around how he transitioned into the field, kind of jumping into AI more recently from other arenas. But he's really been able to also work on delivering AI discussions and also written about this and spoken in Colombia, Germany, in many parts of the globe, from Canada to Turkey and all over the United States. He runs specifically and is the director of the Technology Ethics Initiative at Seattle University. So we'll hopefully learn a little bit more about that as we go forward. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Onur. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's an area where, yeah, I've been giving a lot of thought and doing research in, but I should admit that I don't see myself as an expert. I see myself more as a learner. I don't even know if anybody knows the answers to the questions that we will be posing throughout, but I can tell you a little bit more about my journey. When I was doing my PhD, I was very much interested in questions of memory politics. And so that took me to an exploration of truth and reconciliation commissions in Chile and Peru. So that's my dissertation research and the first book. And so in some ways, as you can see, it was a more sort of straightforward, standard civil and political rights kind of research. Um, and I was so many years later, as I was teaching at Seattle U, I began to take some courses in computer science, mostly with the hope that they could be useful methodologically. Maybe if I learned to code a little bit, I could use like statistical tools better, etc. Back then, I had this idea of having like building a quantitative data set of judicial decisions during violent conflict. That went sideways for a number of reasons, especially because things got real dark in Turkey, where I'm from and where the country that I was going to study. Uh, but um, but meanwhile, as I was taking these courses, I began to settle into a routine, learning about computer science, taking more courses. All of that evolved into a whole master's in computer science. But one thing that, kept coming up, and that was, of course, the early days of the machine learning sort of revolution, was that some of the considerations around human rights came to bleed into this sort of technology space slowly but surely. So there were reports for in 2016, for example, that police departments in the United States were using um, crime prediction algorithms, or that judicial institutions were using recidivism algorithms to predict the likelihood that somebody would, commit a crime in the future. And as you can imagine, these algorithms were often praised as being more objective, more mathematically sound than human judges. Yet they actually had a lot of bias built into them, in great part as a result of the training data sets that were themselves reflective of historical inaccuracies and racial biases in the United States. And so that was maybe an early glimpse. Again, around 2016, there's this one episode of Microsoft starting a chatbot on Twitter, and this was, one of the better times for Twitter, actually, when they had more content moderation than today. And yet, within 24 hours, that chatbot just turned into a sexist, racist jerk out of nowhere. And so they had to actually pull the plug on that project, realizing where this was going. And again, these were some early warning signs, and in some ways, the technology discourse at the time was maybe a little bit more like modest than today. Fast forward to the age of chatbots and like generally available generative AI tools. Uh, Things are actually, perhaps quite a bit more complex. And if you've been, as I'm sure you are, watching the news coming from Iran in the past week or 10 days, it seems like a lot of the concerns around technology have completely converged with concerns around sort of more standard human rights, including, the right to life. And so the Pentagon's decision to use AI tools to select targets and fire on them, and their negotiations with Anthropic, which went nowhere, and then Pentagon's decision to use Anthropic's Claude software regardless, and then OpenAI sort of backroom or backdoor deals to try to win a contract with the Pentagon. So all of that, just very recent news, I think, just brought the human rights considerations around technology into sharp focus. Um, so I guess that's maybe my journey as it intersects with um, rise of modern artificial intelligence. In the book, I look into different mechanisms to address the risks and harms of AI around, again, bias and discrimination, disinformation and hallucinations, deepfakes, our AI-generated content, and so on and so forth. And I look into three methods. One is technical solutions. I'm sure you've heard of terms like watermarking, red teaming, etc. So these sort of more technical solutions. Another one is voluntary business staff regulation. So when businesses set up teams, boards, councils to ensure compliance with legal or ethical principles. And then finally, of course, the law. So statutes or administrative decisions to address AI-related risks and harms. And without giving too many spoilers, I argue that all of these methods have their own space, have their own role, but at the end of the day, none of them is fully satisfactory in addressing the risks and harms of AI. and citizens should do more and should expect more from both businesses and also lawmakers around AI regulation. Anyway, so that is very maybe a broad overview. So for today, of course, we're going to be talking about technology and human rights, and I have a very simple sketch here. Again, I think maybe we should complicate it once we start. But how does technology relate to human rights? And one could say that the tools of technology may enhance human rights protection. So one obvious example is that these days people use smartphone cameras to publicize government abuse during protests, so official censorship doesn't work. In fact, a number of human rights violations became apparent through citizens' use of technology in creative ways around the world in the past 10 to 15 years. Another way in which technology relates to human rights is, of course, by requiring redefinitions of human rights. So before personal cameras, privacy meant something else. Yet once the first personal cameras were introduced by Kodak, in the case of the United States, basically the Supreme Court had to intervene to expand privacy. To make sure that people were safe from others, taking their photos. So that would be an example of new human rights protections emerging, and perhaps artificial intelligence will require of us some innovations in that regard. And then, of course, perhaps very obviously, technology can be used for human rights violations, and so a lot of more technologies can be a simple example. And with something like artificial intelligence, I think what is maybe complicated is that they may be dual use. So often, artificial intelligence tools may have beneficial uses and or neutral uses, uh, but the same underlying technology may be used for human rights violations. In some ways, the technology that is used for targeting military or civilian targets is not very different from the technology for, I don't know, detecting cancer cells. It's pattern recognition technology that looks into a large number of visual data and identifies unusual patterns. And I think that really makes our ideas about human rights, it complicates our ideas of human rights to some extent. So, for example, in international humanitarian law, in the Geneva Conventions, there's a norm that new weaponry should be assessed and inspected. Now, what if a government basically takes pattern recognition tools that do not necessarily have obvious military implications and weaponizes them, right? So, where does the assessment start? Where does the requirement kick in? And so, things like that, I think, really complicate our understandings a little bit. And then the other thing is, at least so far, maybe until about 10 days ago, most of the time when we were thinking of human rights violations through technology, it seemed like private actors, businesses to be more precise, were at the forefront. Most of the criticism fell on the developers and private deployers of these technologies. Government could sometimes be criticized for the use of things like facial recognition, for example. And there were some occasional reports that were unconfirmed coming from places like Libya or Azerbaijan or Israel Palestine that perhaps AI technology was being used for targeting. But the past 10 days, I think, have really raised the profile of government use of AI as a potential human rights violation more than before. So that's where we are, very broadly speaking. Any questions or comments so far? If not, we can move on to the next slide. So again, this is also a very, very broad sketch. How do we govern technology in accordance with human rights? I think one dominant tendency in the United States, definitely since the 1980s, 1990s, has been to allow technological development and hope that it's for the best. ever since the popularization of the internet as a massively available tool, um, the technologies that were developed around the internet, around social media, and so on and so forth, have been more or less unregulated, right? And I mean, it's not that long ago, maybe 10 or 11 years ago at most, that the dominant discourse around technology was that it's a force for good, it's a force for democracy, connection, accountability, and so on and so forth. I think the risks and harms became, well, I mean, I think researchers definitely had been writing about the risks and harms for much longer, but the risks and harms became a lot more prominent in the last 10, 11 years. I would say in the US, the Cambridge Analytica movement was really that pivotal time when the technology discourse moved away from that sort of democracy, human rights, connectivity discourse to wait, something's wrong here. Of course, another one that we're going to spend more time on is set rules on technological development, and that is what we do with a lot of technologies. The one example that I really enjoy giving is cars and seat belts. About 50, 60 years ago, cars were a lot more dangerous than they are today. I mean, they're still dangerous today, but not compared to again 2 generations ago or so. And then governments around the world began to impose rules on wearing seat belts and not driving under influence, improving road conditions, and so on and so forth. And so car technologies became a lot safer. And in some ways, I think it's also a good example to show that innovation and regulation are not in some way binary opposites. That's just a false binary. In fact, well-crafted regulation can promote innovation by setting ethically and legally sort of admissible norms for that technological development to continue. And then a third one is, of course, banning certain forms of technological development. And it does, in history, we have examples of this. Perhaps biological and chemical weapons would be sort of one major example of a technology that was deemed to be, all in all, so harmful and so devoid of beneficial use that they were banned. Of course, as you all very well know, banning a technology doesn't mean that it doesn't get used. Rogue actors may end up using it anyway, but at the very least, it sets some standards on actors that act in good faith. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the set rules part. So that's the one that I feel like artificial intelligence will require. I don't think there will be a categorical ban on most uses of AI, but just allowing it at any cost seems to be, well, the dominant tendency in the United States, but not necessarily one that protects human rights. So, and a lot of what I say, I think, comes from the European Union's understanding of the artificial intelligence situation in their AI Act. So basically, allowing a technological development when it poses little or no risk, and banning it when it poses unacceptable risks and harms, and then setting some rules for risks, so serious risks and harms that don't rise to the level of unacceptable. I mean, obviously, all of the adjectives in those sentences require some elaboration. What is a serious risk versus an unacceptable risk or no risk? Like, this is something to talk about, of course. But this is, broadly speaking, perhaps, what I believe may be the future of artificial intelligence regulation. In the US, there is not, and there will probably not be federal regulation anytime soon. But actually, at the state level, and sometimes at sort of more local levels, like city level, for example, there are rules around either AI as such, or sometimes applications of AI around, say, facial recognition and so on and so forth. I imagine, as educators, we will also see perhaps some changes in especially K through 12, maybe at the school district level, in terms of use of AI in the future. But universities will probably also have their own version of rulemaking in the absence of federal law. Next slide, please. All right. So I am done lecturing, so to say. So I'm curious what you see as some of the leading human rights promises and risks posed by various types of AI. And again, it could be really either the promises or risks, but I would like to hear from you either in the chat or through your voice. Anyone? Thank you, Moira. So yeah, sexual deepfake images. Um, of children as well as adults who have not given their consent. And so, yeah, it is one for which platforms may or may not build guardrails around. In fact, it's not technically that difficult to build those guardrails as long as the platforms want to, but I feel that some are choosing not to. And I think that's also a very important example because typically these deepfake images are not produced by the major AI image producers themselves, but the end users. And so, where does the responsibility fall? Say, Mid-Journey allows, say, I mean, I'm making it up, but allows for illegal content. They don't necessarily produce the illegal content, but an end user, some other person, uses it with their tool then and then posts it on a platform, say like something like X. So who bears responsibility for this kind of conduct? Any comments or any other examples?
Hi, this is Christina in
Hi,
Boise.
Kristen.
Sorry, still driving. Thank you for your presentation. One thing that I think has come up in the context of the war, but I think even beforehand, is this idea of surveillance, right? And sort of the balance of we can use surveillance to catch the bad guys, so to speak, or we can use surveillance against citizens and sort of eroding not only privacy, but even rights of assembly and participation and freedom of speech and those kinds of things. So just curious what you're um, seeing or thinking about sort of that duality of the surveillance piece. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think thank you. This goes hand in hand with David's comments on this surveillance, erosion of privacy, and discrimination. Um, So let's stick to the surveillance piece for a minute, and then Corinna, I'm going to get your comment too. So, what kinds of or what risks of surveillance do you all see?
Well, I think to the protests in Minneapolis, and sorry, I can't see the chat, so I might be saying the same thing. I think in Minneapolis, seeing the ways that ICE agents, were using their own cameras to capture both the faces and the license plates and therefore finding the address of protesters and others. And I think just, we see it in other countries, in China with the Uyghurs and with other groups, and just sort of the mass surveillance that's being put in place there. And so I don't know, I guess that's sort of part of the modern world, but like, yeah, what are the guardrails for that? And is it the role of government or civil society to demand it? I guess, like, I wonder where we help put up guardrails to.
No, yeah, I mean, thank you for your comments. I know in Washington State, for example, there's a huge fight over license plate recognition technology in the hands of local police departments, and so civil rights groups are basically trying to stop, license plate readers, used by police in all but maybe like in extreme circumstances. And I think the global examples you give are very important too. So the Uyghur community in China was, I think, the first case where the risks of surveillance against a dissident group or a minority group were sort of raised. But again, protests in the U.S. now are raising the specter, and in some ways, it's also data that people don't necessarily give consent to when it comes to policing. Say, like, what if TSA or CBP share airport data? Like that was something that I imagine most people didn't give consent to when it comes to say like, their use in the context of protests, right? So raises questions around privacy and consent. Another one is, of course, the possibility that this could also, how to put it, like shift the lines of what evidence is. Uh, like I think it makes it easier for law enforcement to first arrest somebody and then find incriminating evidence rather than the other way around, right? And so, if people's lives are pretty much sort of recorded the whole time, it becomes a lot easier to sort of find incriminating stuff retroactively. Um, and
Well,
going to
oh,
sorry.
well, I was just going to, and granted, I could talk too long on the Minnesota situation because it's, I mean, going outside of what we think are legal rules and laws for conduct has been pretty expansive. So, the surveillance component, having ICE agents actually pose as, within kind of Ubers. And I mean, just completely different structures of trying to, yeah, um, get people and not, you consent. I mean, any sort of legal policies that you thought were in place. And so then you're trying to respond to things that are just unsure that you're like, wait, this is against the law. And then, the stop and you can't be pulled over, but then all of the policing due to racial profiling. So it's been, yeah, very challenging.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, if hopefully it doesn't go in that direction, but of course, that sounds really totalitarian when, people's private and public lives are merged and most of it is recorded one way or another because we have such digital lives these days. And so if that is used for some sort of government surveillance, it's very dangerous. And then a comment that Kavita left is that AI can misjudge people using facial recognition, especially people of color. Um, I don't know if you have seen the Netflix documentary Coded Bias, but um, the person who's sort of starring that documentary is Joy Bolan-Whinney, and I think she came across some of the findings when she was an undergrad researcher at MIT. Uh, she's a Black woman, and she realized that the correct identification rate for facial recognition tools falls especially with Black people and especially Black women. And so, in fact, there are already sort of recorded cases of false arrests due to failures of facial recognition. And so, in some ways, surveillance is problematic when it gets things right, and it can be problematic when it gets things wrong as well. So, in that way, there are really two risks there. Anything else to add to surveillance or privacy?
Well, I think we had discussed it once. I mean, and it was raised by Maura, the image shifting, so that, both on the sexual front, but also we've seen evidence of people posting, um, and altering images, and, through the surveillance and then yeah, that ramification.
So like surveillance combined with deep fakes
Yeah.
or like manipulation tools. Yeah. And then of course another use of the term surveillance is more like corporate surveillance. So it's not so much when government does the surveilling, but when companies do. Typically, the reason for corporate surveillance is maximizing profits, engagement, something like that. So it doesn't sound as ominous as perhaps government surveillance in terms of its consequences. But it can be again a violation of privacy if like people do not want to be bombarded with ads or targeted sort of campaigns for them to buy something or join something and so on and so forth. And then in some cases, the two may merge. There was an article that came very early, by the way, 2013 or 2014. So like, very early days of the sort of the deep learning revolution. And the title was Facebook knew that I was gay before I did. And so like basically Facebook's algorithm predicted that this person could be gay based on their taste profile, maybe their friends, maybe the places that they visited, and so on and so forth. Now, and this can be dangerous when people do not want to be outed, when there are some risks and dangers of outing people for their identity, and so that's perhaps another way in which surveillance can happen, even if it's not meant to be repressive in its nature. Other things? If not, let's talk about one of the promises, which is making it easier to sort through data faster. So, has anybody used AI tools toward that end, sorting through data? Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's especially for those in the digital humanities, there are definitely some benefits there, both in terms of getting access to data, digitized data faster, or reading manuscripts if they're difficult to read. So OCR systems can help with that. Do you see any other benefits to artificial intelligence as a tool that enhances either human rights as such or human rights education or research? One that I've heard, I mean, I can't really sort of speak from experience, but human rights organizations themselves are often inundated with data. They have to perhaps deal with a lot of things, Kavita. Yeah, Suna for some is amazing. Yeah, like when I was doing research in Peru, the number of archives that people had to sift through was larger than like, the capacity of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. More so in Colombia, where about 50 years of war left behind a huge archival record. And so, in situations like these, perhaps AI tools can help sift through information, cross-check the validity of information, and so on and so forth. So, in that way, it can really be a force multiplier for human rights groups, let's say nonprofit groups, as well as governmental or quasi-official entities like truth commissions, etc. Anything else? If not, and we can go back to this. What is Lansa AI?
Hi, Lensa AI, it creates avatars and all, like deep
Mhm,
fakes, someone mentioned.
mhm, mhm. And
Uh,
like I really don't know. So what does it do with avatars?
so it generates images.
Oh, okay.
Generates images and avatars. If you give a picture, like how it enhances some of the qualities based on the base, like any of the profiles. the limited understanding what it has. Making more sexual oriented. Even kids, they put in the pictures of like a picture of them, small young kids, and even young kids. It adds the masculine features like superheroes or the racial bias, not just racial, the sexual content too. It doesn't understand, like we don't give the age and everything, right? We don't give the information. By looking at it, it doesn't have enough knowledge how to enhance it. So yeah, it's a
Yeah,
predicted feature, yes.
I see. I see. Okay, I didn't know that, but I see. Yeah, and societies have developed all these very helpful norms around consent, and especially consent when it comes to imagery, especially intimate imagery. And so, the fact that AI now threatens to sort of completely undermine all of that, I think, is really a major risk. And yeah, thanks for
I,
sharing it.
I yeah, I've learned about it because I was judging one of the contests, the high school debate contest about the Lensa AI app, how it needs to be, why it needs to be banned. It's almost 2, 3 years back now. There's so many similar to that. Then all the facts, like how many, like millions of cases against it, and real statements, real cases from real personally, and how it steals the without like watermarking. Now we know that right now we are learning and we can learn slowly, but like we are behind. So we are not aware of that. So technology is spreading so fast, the AI, even before we understand it. And now the data is like they're scraping the data. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I didn't use it.
What was that?
Chris,
You could use it? What did you say, Kavita?
I didn't use it.
Oh, you
I'm
didn't.
saying it's not, yes,
okay.
it was, I didn't use it. I was judging and I saw all the facts. Like Pranav was judging. Pranav was the one of the contestants, so he did all the research.
Yeah.
In the debate tournament, yes. I've learned about both pros and cons. Thank you.
And I think with other AI technologies, that's the risk is that, in fact, it does have a lot of innocuous uses. I think most of the users probably use it for, I don't know, maybe silly things or things that are not in any way like inherently harmful, or maybe they may use it to like, I don't know, see like how they would look if they added, I don't know, hair or they dyed their hair or something like that. But then uh, I think, problems start when the technology is also capable of just, taking in somebody else's private information and adding all these sort of layers of illegality basically onto it. Christy, you were going to say something, right?
Yes, because I realized that I hadn't thought about this until Steve shared, but I have now a grandbaby. But before they merged my daughter and my son-in-law to create what would that, baby look like, and obviously it is that kind of merging of, and you're disclosing obviously photo images to create something else. But that was obviously it was done, and it's an app, for kind of the innocence component, but at the same time, you realize how yeah, it can be
Mhm.
used improperly, as she raised.
Mhm. And the baby that actually eventually comes will always be much cuter than anything that the AI tool could have imagined. Um, so yeah, David, AI may replace human creativity, etc., undermining fundamental rights. In fact, this is one of the major worries, especially among members of creative sort of communities, that a lot of AI tools are trained on the books and songs that already exist, and typically no royalties are paid to them. So for those of you who have published in journals or written books, I mean, you don't really own uh, your rights fully to those publications, right? So say like if you publish in a journal that is under Taylor and Francis, they actually own the rights, and so they may sell your article without you ever consenting to it. And by the way, selling it, it's like it's at least the legal way that it's done. I mean, often AI companies just scrape whatever they find online, and so they don't even pay anybody anything. And so that's a major copyright issue. And then I think what complicates copyrights in the age of AI is that AI doesn't plagiarize verbatim. When a student plagiarizes verbatim, it's easy to catch that. It's like, okay, you just wrote this and you didn't put any, quotation marks, and here is where that idea comes from. The problem with AI is that that doesn't come from any one specific place. It is a mishmash of words and ideas, and at the end of the day, it might not always be possible to find the source. And so as a result, AI generated output, both as a plagiarism problem, obviously, is difficult to catch. But also from a copyright standpoint, it raises a lot of tricky legal questions that I'm not a lawyer, I'm not necessarily equipped to answer, but like where do copyrights get violated? Where does a piece of writing constitute regurgitation of somebody else's words, and where is it seen as generative, as something creative, as something that doesn't belong to any one of the human authors? But yeah, I mean, that I think is a major problem. And then there's another dimension to the loss of creativity. Uh, it is reported that websites have lost traffic by about 10 to 15% last year. So what that means is that when people want to do online research on a topic, they just go to the chatbot. They don't search the website. Like say, like I have a headache. I don't go to the Mayo Clinic website. I just write, I have a headache. What's the problem? Right? To a chatbot. Now, of course, the problem with that is if these websites lose traffic, they may go extinct, or they may stop producing content, and that reduces the quality of the product that comes out of AI chatbots too. So in some ways, it's really paradoxical that AI, but by undermining the websites that it draws traffic away from, may also undermine the sort of high quality information that it ingests. Um, I mean, definitely, it's risky, and again raises another indirect human rights risk, which is that, um, especially with healthcare advice, uh, mental health advice, and things like that. I mean, these are legal advice. These are fields where highly trained professionals are supposed to provide service, right? And if AI chatbots somehow replace them, there's a risk that people will end up receiving a lower quality version of human medical or legal advice that might actually make them put them in harm's way. And so, there's also that additional risk. Um, and there have been some instances of, this is another topic, but there have been some instances of self-harm resulting from human interactions with AI. It doesn't happen all the time necessarily, but like when people have, suicidal thoughts, when they're going through a difficult time, artificial intelligence tools are not necessarily the most nuanced, sensitive, uh, quote unquote friends out there. Sometimes the advice they give or the kinds of conversations they engage actually encourages suicidal behavior rather than discourage. And so there's also that. Yeah, yeah. There were, I think, at least two teenagers who committed suicide, and it seems like some of the last things they did was have a conversation with a chatbot that encouraged them. So it's very scary. Anything else? If not, we can move on, perhaps. Oh, Kavita, you were going to say something.
Yes, yeah. For AI apps, I do know a lot of people living using the health apps. That's very highly dependent to survive on the AI. And if it is tested well for good reasons, and if it passes FDA and all the process, then it is very helpful. Because you mentioned about health cases, but not like, okay, anybody can create these apps and without any restrictions, then it's dangerous. But if it's coming from healthcare professionals, the AI is making huge difference. So yeah, we do see a lot of bad things, but like my son's life completely changed just because of this. And I do personally know more than thousands of these kids that's living on it. He lives on the artificial pancreas. So it predicts algorithm. Okay, every few days, every day it resets. When he wakes up, it's 24-hour monitoring. It takes away so much of the like suffering and management and dependency from the family and everyone around, even for doctors. So they don't need them anymore. It does help a lot, um, but it has to be like FDA approved and clinically tested very well, and it has to go through the right ways. So,
Mhm.
yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add it. I know we're talking the negatives, but wanted to add some positive too.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing that because especially medical diagnostics and treatment are maybe two of the areas where AI can be most useful. Because again, the same pattern matching technology that, maybe 10 minutes ago that we talked with respect to surveillance can be extremely helpful in identifying protein selections that actually can be used as a baseline for new drugs. Or pattern matching, say in radiology, may actually catch some tumors that the human eye may not be able to see. And so in that way, when used properly, that can be really life-saving. I'll add more. There are AI for social good projects. Some of them are spearheaded by major corporations like Microsoft. Some of them are sort of more like small scale. But what they do is they try to use artificial intelligence for community projects. Say, for example, improving a city's sanitation or sewage system so that people have access to cleaner, healthier environments, or identifying houses that overheat in the summer so that they can be insulated, so that lives are saved, and so on and so forth. In that way, I think artificial intelligence can be extremely beneficial. And I think for human rights practitioners, it also puts them in a bind because yes, there are all these risks, but it's also possible that it might be a cost saving at a time when there's a real crunch for funding. Perhaps it can save them costs in terms of organizational costs and so on and so forth. So there's definitely that other angle. Because again, AI can really improve the efficiency or productivity of people and organizations, and so that is something to keep in mind when we're talking about AI as well. Anything else? And then, one final thing that perhaps we should talk about is the environmental impact. So, as AI technologies have moved to the strategy of scaling, that is to say, using more and more resources to get better, the use of land and water in data centers, and of course, electricity through data centers is something that is being criticized a lot. If the trends go in the direction that they are going, the energy demands of AI will be incredibly high in a couple of years, and so that's a real stressor for the world's energy grid.
Yes, can I
Uh,
just add to that? Because I think the data centers, we're seeing it here. And where are these things being placed? Again, it's usually on vulnerable communities, on indigenous lands, I mean, and so forth.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and some of the tech optimists basically believe that the AI revolution will have uh, sort of solve some of the environmental challenges and will sort of rekindle interest in renewables. But again, so far these are more speculation than reality. So, it is still, I think the jury is still out about whether AI can help the environment, but I think the risks when it comes to energy and water use are very, very real. Yeah. We can move on to the next slide. So This is a question, two questions. What are the ideal ways to govern AI today, and what are the responsibilities of various entities? Could be government, could be business. I said universities, but like actually educational institutions in general, and of course, ordinary citizens who are not necessarily AI creators or lawmakers. Like, what are our respective responsibilities? I'll be very happy to hear from you all.
I would say, we're a nonprofit education, so not a university system or anything, but a nonprofit education center. And I think, it's really important for us to be learning, but also figuring out how to create opportunities for folks in our community to also be learning and grappling with these questions and learning. I think we find people are always hungry for what are the actionable steps that they can take. So thinking about what that looks like in this space is also interesting. But I think definitely we all have a role in helping people to kind of, understand this rapidly changing and emerging landscape of AI and other technologies.
No, absolutely. I think nonprofits are, they're of course educators. And the other thing that they can serve is perhaps, as pressure points. I think ordinary citizens often feel too isolated or too weak in the, vis-a-vis these giant corporations. And so I think nonprofits do a really great job of aggregating people's values, interests, complaints, and sort of channeling them into sort of more constructive forms of pressure. Any other thoughts?
K to 12 education about the cybersecurity and digital citizenship, things like that in high schools, in schools like K to 12. That would be really helpful. The government can enforce that and prepare them and protect them from these.
By the way, do you see that happening in different school districts? Is this happening?
I live in Texas, and our schools, starting kindergarten, they give them, they have a choice of a Mac or an iPad. My son is 18 now, is a senior, but in his first grade, since he's like kindergarten, he never had a textbook or a pen. And they call it like digital citizenship, and they want to save trees environmentally. So they never taught him like writing with a pen and a paper. Like, we don't want to cut the trees, which was good, like environmental sciences, but they were always like, he always grew up with the Mac or an iPad in his hand. So that means everything he's ever done, homeworks, everything, he had a barcode and scan. He scans it to get into gym. Everything is digital prints all over. But
Okay,
we were not
interesting.
aware of it's never, yes. And Christy knows that. He wanted to write about it because when he was looking at the environmentally, how they're saving the world by doing this, right? But everything is like digital footprint everywhere. For me, like, I never signed a signature in a paper. They said he has a barcode. As a parent, there's no parent signature. Can I sign any PTA meetings in my kindergarten? And I'm not saying it's right now. That was his senior. That's last 12 years of his life or 13 years. So this generation is living on that. So they use AI. They've been using AI, and the Lensa app, like that one I mentioned, that was his ninth grade debate. And now that's 3 years back. So they were very advanced. They've been using every AI tool, and they know how the teachers are tracking them. They know how to get away. They know everything, how to humanize it's very hard for us. And he was on the, so I'm so sorry he's not here. He's supposed to be here. AI, Mark Cuban has AI boot camp. So he was one of the ambassadors for that. He was using, every month they explore 20 new AI tools. They give them free access to all these tools to play and build and learn from it. And he was one of the ambassadors. They were doing boot camps every year. Not a bad way. They don't know. They are like good kids. They are not going to be misusing it at this age, but they know these exist. It is about exploring and learning, and not to get any benefit out of that at this age. But there are hundreds of them outside, hundreds of apps they have access to, and they're all free and they're always playing with them. So it's hard for parents like me to track and try to see what it can do, but they're leaving digital footprints everywhere. That's what, and the data is being used everywhere. My EV car, where he's going every second of the data, his life 360, where he is every second. So the whole world has that information. His projects he puts it in somewhere, like he did a HR USA project. He did, and it's like you are a human rights advocate, and you are leaving this information everywhere. And it is not something I can shred, and I can put it in a shredder. Just before the tax of March, we clean up everything. There's nothing. I cannot destroy any of this information you're leaving behind. That everything they search, like his project, they work so hard. Let's say, example, HRUS, 3 months he worked, but just he puts that in Grammarly or in like chat somewhere just to edit and proof it. Or before he's creating a site for it, he's just entering it just to shorten it to one page summary like Christy asked him to do, and he puts it in one of the AI tools. That means I get all that information. Everyone. That project is like became public now, right? So any research, any of us, everybody's doing all these. Anyone can take that same article or research. Everybody owns it now. Same thing, which is I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but we have to be aware of that. And they're not like people who are using 80% of us, we don't know where it's going.
Yeah. I mean, that puts
Data
things in perspective, right? In the sense that I think, maybe we here belong to a generation where like it was, we remember days before smartphones or even the widespread use of email. Probably, you were all trained in cursive at some point. So like, and then, like in a digital native generation that you're describing, I mean, it's a completely different game for them. And in some ways, refusal, at least, from the way you're describing, refusal doesn't seem to be a strategy either. I mean, they fall behind if they refuse to use technologies. And so it's just a very complicated situation. Oh, and meanwhile, David wrote, so to mandate companies to disclose how decisions are made and adhere to strong data privacy standards when they use AI. Also to disclose how they are collecting data to train their LLMs and ask consent or permission for it. I believe our regulation approach setting minimum standards is needed. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in some ways this is what not even so much the AI Act in the European Union, but the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, aim to do. That is to say, create data privacy and protection standards, and also a lot of opt-out possibilities. So in a way, allowing people to opt out of cookies on their websites, or opt out of sort of giving consent to the use of their data in the future, and so on and so forth. Because I think for most customers, I think what we experience is a trade-off between convenience and privacy, right? So sometimes it's really convenient for me to leave my credit card information out there and then like keep on using it instead of entering my 16 digits every single time. The risk is, if of course, if that information gets stolen, it's pretty bad. And so, and sometimes people err on the side of caution, and sometimes not. But even having that choice, I think, is important. Same with data disclosures, etc. And then when it comes to LLM data collection and training methods, again, I mean, a lot of early data sets for AI was really just whatever they could scrape on the internet, and so in that way, maybe the damage has already been done, but at least going into the future, there definitely has to be some standard for data collection and use. If there's nothing else,
I'll throw one thing in just because the World Program for Human Rights Education, we're now in it's the 5th phase, and it's focusing on youth and children. And one of the 3 themes. One is on the environment and climate change, another on gender equality, and the third is on digital technologies. And I think when Kavita was talking about, I think that the whole ethical aspects of how are we bringing ethics into training young people and protecting our young people is really, really important. And we've seen it because even businesses right now are going after a lot of the young people who might be right in high school. I mean, because they're so savvy on a lot of these techs, so that all of a sudden, yeah, they're off yeah, I just think that yeah, it's an important balance, and it is frightening at times. And as I think, have raised very well, we do have to figure out how can there be some rules and responsibilities, and especially on the ethical fronts of what people can and cannot do. But right now, I mean, it is funny because I just read an article that people are now going back to cursive writing, as you pointed out, in classrooms because we've lost the abilities, at least on creativity and hand movement. So yeah.
That's a nice
Thank you.
segue to the next conversation we're going to have, actually, right? Which is our role as educators. Yeah, so we can move on to the next slide, please. I mean, I said higher education, but that was mostly, I guess, this is where I'm coming from. I think the bigger question is, should AI be incorporated into education at any level? And again, what should be appropriate policy responses for teachers, instructors, and beyond? What are the gaps and how can those gaps be addressed? Because at least I can tell you about my campus community. We are a mid-sized university, and so we have about maybe 10,000 people all in all, about 8,000 students, and then, okay, maybe more like 11,000 people all in all. And, we do receive calls to incorporate AI more into what we do. And I would say our campus is very much divided over this question. It's probably the most polarizing topic right now, in the sense that some people want to be more technology forward, incorporate artificial intelligence into the educational curriculum, teach students to be better at AI so that, they when they join the workforce, they are at an advantage. And then others basically believe that AI really poses too many risks and too many problems, the ones we were discussing, to be incorporated into education seamlessly. And when I listen to either side, I feel like they're right. So, and that's just, a very difficult sort of conversation to have. So yeah, I'm asking these questions mostly because I want to learn what to do. What are your thoughts?
I think that everyone is grappling with those questions. I know our legislature and school districts around the state are, even this session, thinking very intentionally about what are the limitations, what are the benefits, all of those questions that you posed. I think they have some clearer thoughts around the deep fake issue and some of that, and putting some, parameters there. But in terms of how students, to what extent are they both learning, but learning about the use of AI sort of from an ethical standpoint, I think there's a long way to go in developing that. And at the same time, most of the school districts here have banned cell phones during the school day. Some teachers are having students actually handwrite tests or papers to prove that they're not they're not using AI to write them. At least if they handwrite them, it's at least processed enough while they were writing it and sort of a return to cursive. I mean, so there's this interesting push and pull right now between it's part of the world we live in. How do we educate and help our students learn? And, the guardrails are sort of the ethics and those concerns. I don't feel I'm not clear on who is the most knowledgeable to help put those in place, I guess, given, where things are at right now. So it's, I fear, once again, sort of a big experiment on the backs of kids. And at the same time, at least kids are learning about it, where I feel like a lot of adults are sort of not in a space where they're actively learning. And so maybe fumbling around with it as much, if not more, than the kids. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'll read Moira. I feel
This is
almost
actually
ill-equipped.
very
Oh,
interesting.
sorry.
Um,
Corinne, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Um,
Go ahead.
just last week, I work in middle school. Just last week, one of our teachers asked me to give a presentation on the pros and cons of AI because I'm our computer tech and how it can be used responsibly because our students are kind of run amok with it. They're using it to write their essays and basically do their homework for them. So I think it is a tool, but if we don't teach kids how to use it at a very early age, they're just going to basically shoot themselves in the foot with it.
And maybe the reverse question is, what are some of the things that you want to teach your students that are not AI skills? Like, what is the core that you want to teach them so that like they're equipped to deal with a world, AI or no AI?
I would say it's critical thinking. I mean, when you think
Mhm.
of like a simple skill, and how then can you work with AI so that you're actually still having them, or having all of us, making sure that we're using our critical thinking skills and questioning and challenging and finding arguments pro and counter.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
I was thinking along those same lines, Christy. I was an English teacher for several years, and just like the power of a student learning how to write in terms of developing their critical thinking and logical reasoning, I just don't think there's any substitute for it. So I'm really worried about kids not having that opportunity I mean, writing is really hard, and I'm worried that they won't be supported to do that if there's just, all these tools available where they don't have to anymore.
Yeah. I have a colleague in computer science, and she makes the students write some of the exams by hand, so pen and paper computer science exams, and she calls it computer science unplugged. Uh, I think very cool name. But yeah. Yeah, and I'll catch us up on the chat thread from Moira. So I feel almost ill-equipped to respond as I have been out of the workplace directly for some time now, and I feel so ignorant about a lot of AI. I have already learned so much this evening. Disclosures of practice and consent to participate seem like a basic idea to start. So yeah, and then when we were talking about like some non-AI skills, research methods was what Moira wrote. Um, yeah, and I think that's something that some of my colleagues are doing too. So they allow AI to be used, say, in generating ideas for an essay, for example, but they expect the student to acknowledge that. If some sections were written directly by AI, acknowledge that. And then some also flip the script. So basically, they expect the student first to have an AI chatbot write, say, an essay, say like a one-page essay, and then grade the essay. So the student grades the AI written essay. And then the student's job is to basically explain why they are grading the essay the way that they are. And so it's almost like reverse engineering um, the AI output. I'll read Kavita. Phone ban in Texas is making a big difference for teachers and students, improves student-teacher relations, and they started going to teacher instead of ChatGPT when they have a question. Is this new, by the way? Is it a new ban?
Yes, they banned it this year. It's going well. They're all very happy. They're making them sit in front of them and write. And one more I mentioned is when the kids without any, they have phone pouches that locks them, so the Wi-Fi and all nothing works. They drop it somewhere, so it's working well. They cannot cheat at all, and they put on more controls on the iPads and whatever they give, and they're not allowing them to bring their own computers, anything at all. So they're not allowed to bring any technology from outside. And on the instruments they give and the technology, they all pre-screen it, more secure, more safety features on the apps. And of course, they have ChatGPT, but and they're making them sit in groups and then work on it more like hands-on. Someone had mentioned clinical research and all, so it's similar to that. And one issue, like what we need to improve for them, is a lot of shallow learning. So much and vertical learning is happening with the kids right now because they're exposed to so many things, and because so much information and knowledge is available at their fingertips, so they want to do 100 different things, but no deep dive. That research is going to really help. So it's very easy. Anybody can finish their project, this research project, in a month using the help of AI. But when they do the research or a survey, something, you need to reach out to people. So many important skills they're learning and they don't know that they exist. That they're going to be, next generation is going to miss that. Yeah, we are a family of software engineers. So my daughter is in Google doing the content management team. So that's all she sees. Content creators, that's like social media. So, and my husband is with all the vehicles, EVs. So he's mining the data of all the vehicles it's doing. So we all know I mean, I'm the only good person working at a finance and working with the CSO. I'm like, you cannot have a picture and you cannot have a birth date and a name in the same email, then you're fired. So that we're old school, but everyone else, it's legally they are doing mining the data because they want to understand it. Like Christy mentioned, data centers, power grids, and all of that. Unless they understand how we are using this, we cannot save the power grids. So they're all interrelated. It's more complex than ban this. It's not going to happen. So, but everyone has to take that responsibility also.
Yeah. This past Thursday, Karen Howe visited our campus. So she is a journalist who wrote this book called Empire of AI, and it was about mostly about OpenAI and Sam Altman. But basically, one of the things that she was criticizing is that today's AI production in the US has really gone the way of scaling. So that is to say, using more resources to basically fortify the underlying models. And she was basically saying that maybe we should go for small, like we should have niche, bespoke models that solve particular problems, but not everything. And so instead of having a one size fits all AI, if we have sort of small scale AI, we could solve some of these energy problems. So yeah, I mean, it was an interesting take. But yeah, I mean, going back to the classroom, it's definitely very interesting. I mean, I see also among my students that also as consumers of news, they tend to learn more from TikTok and the social media. So like they don't read the newspaper directly. They have their curated list of news, and then maybe they go into like the news story if they are interested, but they get their political news from the platforms. And I think that has the obvious risk that you were talking about, the deep dive, right? So oftentimes, the way that you see news on social media are like, it's just one sentence or one image, one video, and sometimes that hides more than reveals. And so there's definitely that need for critical thinking, sometimes reading long things, long meaning more than 500 words long. Sometimes writing long essays. I mean, these are important skills. I always tell my students, like, you need to write 3,000 words for the final paper. I'm not doing that to torture you. In any topic, if you want to develop a complex set of thoughts, you need to have that kind of space. Like, you can't develop the same complexity of thought in 500 words that you should in 3,000. So, yeah. Yeah. Christina, it's probably definitely going to make you feel worse, at least in the short run. The book doesn't seem to have a very happy message, but yeah, but definitely excellent reporting.
Well, you've made me think about, with the flipping kind of the, critiquing and grading somebody's report that has actually used the AI, similarly about, I mean, I do think that young people are able, and maybe this is I don't have any information saying that this is right, but I feel like they are able to pick out misinformation or kind of the fake uh, photos. They see because they've looked at so many of these things, they're quick. But I do think that, the idea of trying to create activities that they're able to then think, okay, where's the misinformation? How is this being set up to actually have you respond the way that maybe the promo wants you to respond, and it's really misinformation. And even my mother just said, I get all these news hitting my phone and it doesn't seem real, and it's not, it is fake news. And how are you, the scams and how are you not setting yourself up to really go down misinformation beliefs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes I think for our generations, like say, when you read the New York Times or Washington Post as human rights educators, I'm sure you can see like the good coverage, like the excellent investigative journalism, as well as terrible editorial decisions and like editing words out. Like instead of saying that people were killed, they are found dead or something like that. Uh, and so like you can see through that BS because I think our training has been has allowed us to sort of see through that BS, and I imagine maybe for younger generation of today that's what they're going to be good at with digital technologies.
Well, and I think with the whole Minnesota kind of ice raids and the media, I mean, how things, said one thing and everyone's like, wait a minute, how could this be true? I think it's opened up. Maybe I'm trying to be positive, feel positive with the notion that people are, we do have the technology and people are trying to cover it. That, I mean, fortunately, that's how at least some truth came out from incidences that even at the top level of a government, is saying one thing. So, yeah, and I think using some of these examples and trying to put them for students to be able to critique or even find things that are said one way, even by state actors or businesses, and that later it comes out, that you know that it was incorrect.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, maybe pressure also these AI producing companies to do better, to build the guardrails, to be more truthful, to train their data in ways that reflect sort of accurate reporting and so on and so forth could help too. I mean, I know it's impossible to make AI 100% accurate, but the more the better. Um, my example is that when I was in college and beyond, Wikipedia had just started, and people used to think about Wikipedia as this horrible thing that's like just lies, and you can't possibly cite Wikipedia. It's not a reliable source of information. The truth is, Wikipedia actually did a pretty good job of content moderation and editorial sort of decision making to the point that I think today it's trusted as. I mean, again, it's not a peer-reviewed journal or anything, but it's generally trusted as producing reasonably well written and accurate pieces on people, on things, and so. I mean, so it's not impossible to improve the standing of a technology, but again, some humans have to make the decision to do that. Any last reflections?
I'd love to know what people think around stories, so personal stories, because I am one. That's for my PhD recently. I was talking about the personal stories of human rights educators and what can we glean from these stories. And, I guess I was still thinking about the creative, the law, what David mentioned about losing the creativity and knowing that there are even actors now that are completely animated, and taking over and challenges that way. But how do we guard, or I don't know, safeguard really people's stories so that we're able to bring those into the classroom? And then, if once you get it into a space that's, anything could be done with it. Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm thinking of our human rights education podcast. We now have 73, podcasts of folks out there. But what should we be thinking of to make sure that they aren't taken and used in potentially negative ways?
What do y'all think? I have a friend here who's an English professor, and he's actually more of a pro AI person, if one could sort of label him that way. But I think what he's trying to say is that it's not so much the medium; it's more the story that matters, in the sense that, like, any tool may help or hurt. I think in the process of writing and creating stories. And so, I think what he's trying to say is that perhaps AI can help one develop a deeper character, or a character with a sort of certain flair. And in that way, it can be helpful, or it can help an author maybe sort of figure out a twist or something along those lines. And there is nothing inherently wrong with that, he says. I think the problems start when the story becomes AI's generation of the story, and that sort of the human element is lost. I'm more of a traditionalist compared to him, but he's. But I understand his point. I think definitely it's a valuable position to take.
Thank you. Well, I think I'm realizing that we are now down to 4 minutes. I was getting so into the conversation that I guess I think we all want to thank you. Here are some
Of
wonderful
course.
resources that you have left with us. People will be able to get the slide decks so that you can look at his resources in more detail. I'm going to drop this in the chat for a second, and I'll also follow up and send it out to you so that we can have feedback on this wonderful presentation and see how we can continue to improve. Our next session will be next month on Monday, April 13th. So it'll be our last of our Training as Action series for this academic year. So it's going to be an action lab, strategies on defending human rights and democracy. So more to come on that. If you haven't become a member yet, please think about joining us. We'll also send you out the leadership survey if you haven't completed it, so that you can continue to get more involved if you're interested. Oops. And then I think most of you know already the ways that you can get additional materials through our newsletter, our blogs, our social media, our podcast I mentioned, our libraries and lessons, and the briefs, and our action teams I think we've discussed. But there are ways to get more involved as you see fit. We want to thank again our amazing 21 co-sponsors for this series that have really made it possible, so that we can have incredible, wonderful facilitators like Honor. And thank you very much. So let's give you a round of applause. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you,
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you all. And I'm going to exit, stop sharing, and I'm going to drop and grab the tool to, I'll stop the recording here. And then I will send.